Michigan Production Alliance. This is Barton Bund.
And I'm Mark Adler.
Welcome back, Mark. We're doing more safety dispatches, and we're covering some pretty incredible events. It seems like every day we are seeing something new, major coming about, and something unexpected, such as in Southern California, commercial production has been halted by the unions. Is that right?
They were certainly talking about it with all the major unions affected, but it's unclear whether they're actually going to stop because of the massive amount of money involved in shutting everyone down. They have found, as far as I've read recently, that the protocols that they've put in place are working, and they're willing to take the risk because the protocols are working overall, at least on film sets. Widely in the community, maybe not.
Well, I mean, you can be doing everything right on a film set, but you still have the world around you. And with the surge of virus cases, I mean, you can have your bubble, but your bubble is surrounded. And it just means that there are so many unknowns. What must be hard for a production of any size is this idea that, wow, planning is so difficult. It's so difficult to plan anything because of all these insurmountable factors, it seems to me.
It is, but pre-planning and pre-production are the things that will protect us. If people are able to put together a show and know that they can get the PPE that they require, get the COVID officer that they, the whole team that they require, get a good AD team that is required, and trusted members and a good crew, then chances are it'll work fine.
We're going to talk more about safety today and just about a lot of the coordinating. Our guest today is Ryan D Silva, who's a Michigan guy who has worked all over in a lot of. He's unique, I think, because he's worked in live events such as Super Bowl and award shows and things like that. And commercials and in feature films, so it's
and music videos as well.
Videos. So he's a guy who has seen a lot, and he's been in the midst of a lot of the changes that are happening as we're seeing with all the safety stuff. So Ryan we're gonna bring on in just a moment, and we'll be able to talk about what an AD does and what the AD's role is in the midst of all the chaos, in the midst of all the unknowns that we're experiencing right now.
That's right, because I'd like to find out, for example, all these protocols that are going in, they may last well beyond the actual virus. So we'll have to find out what actually sticks. Are we going to be able to shake hands with anyone after this is all over? Who knows?
At the bare minimum, I mean, shaking hands is a good example. If you can't do that, what else can't you do it? So it's sort of like we are in the midst of redesigning, many aspects of our, we're in the midst of moderating and changing our behaviors as people, but we're also changing. I think we're changing the way that media is created as well.
No question.
So welcome, Ryan. Welcome to In Frame.
Hey guys, thanks for having me out. It's let me just say it's so good to see both of you guys.
Good to see you, man. Tell us about. So you've worked recently. What would you say is what is it shocking, and is it a lot to get used to when you're adjusting to the new safety protocols? Was it a lot of retraining on your part?
Yeah, I think it was retraining on everyone's part, right? And it was definitely came out of a lot of us who sitting at home. I think there was, for me at least, and Mark, I think you could attest to this. There is this sort of certain love-hate relationship within film, and especially working crew, where I think there's this common cynical, it's also comedic sort of commiseration, and working in this industry, you're like, what am I doing with my life? And especially, it depends on the show. What we have the blessing of is if it's not a great gig, then we're going to be done with it in a week, right? If it is great, we're going to be done with it in a week. So it's one of those. And I think where I was at was when I first went back to work, I realized though, hey, this is something I have to do. Like, I actually do miss doing it. If I'm not doing it, as I've spent too much time, maybe I'm like indoctrinated into it, and it becomes my own homeostasis as being on a film set. But I didn't realize that, because I had just, by the grace of God, within these last 5 years or so, I've worked pretty nonstop, or very consistently, you know? So you forget that what life was like without it. And when I first came back, so I'll backtrack there. I stayed in my house for however long it was, maybe 3 months, right? As soon as it hit.
That's right.
And yeah, I was somewhat terrified. I remember going to the grocery store and I created my own like hazmat suit where I put a raincoat on, I had the scarf, I had mask on top of mask, I had goggles, I put a poncho over myself, I had pockets full of gloves. So every time I was grabbing a new item, I was switching it out. There was that level of fear in me at that moment, and just trying to do whatever we could, and at that point was asked to stay at home. However, at that point, I got to work fairly early on. And I know I already backtracked, but let me backtrack one more time. I'll go back to the start for me. I was in Miami doing the Super Bowl halftime show, right? And we start hearing about Corona. And and maybe for you guys it might be different, but for me it was, growing up, we've heard about these things. I remember I was an intern, like that would have been 10 years prior. I was an intern at the Daily Show in New York, and that was H1N1 was sort of the thing, and clearly being a show of that format, it was in our topical stuff, but it wasn't something that ever was, we were scared, but never to the degree of what ended up happening, right?
No. You didn't have to wear a mask, Ryan. You didn't have to do that.
You didn't have to. We didn't, and we heard about. And there's swine flu before or after that. There was just a lot of hearing about these things, and then I work in D.C. and there's a lot of every year. And in other places, I see a lot of East Asian tourists that always have masks on. And I remember, not really like looking down at anybody, but like, oh, that's interesting. You know what I mean? Like, you would never, it was so out of our realm, and that these were things that happened elsewhere and maybe made it here, but didn't really make it here, right? So then I come back and I jumped right into another show, which happened to be in Michigan. And if you're first ADing, this is a first ADing an indie that was, a 10-day indie, so you're in the mix. You're just gotta go, and a lot of times in shows, it's you lose your social life depending on the show and the demands of it, right? Because if you got 10 days to finish this movie, you gotta go. So I'm sort of dead to the rest of the world. I'm not really watching news. I'm literally redoing a schedule at night, and then I'm going back, having a cocktail to unwind, and I'm going to bed, right? That's sort of what's happening. I don't have time to go on my phone, social media. I lost fantasy football this year because I was on another show of that nature, and I forgot to change my lineup. So all this stuff's going on in the news, I guess, while I'm doing this show. The world's falling apart. And you get the occasional side chatter, like, oh, this is, did you hear about Italy? Did you hear about this? Sure. Can we, where's my sides at? You know what I mean? It's more, all right, on to scene 32, take that off the plate. That's where I'm at. And then at some point, I get a thing where we need to start having more sanitizer in our morning meetings. And on that side show, it's advisable on, I feel like, an indies a lot to always do a morning meeting, just because you don't have as much pre-production time as you might on a studio show that's in 2 months. So I always do a morning meeting.
Morning meeting now. Like, I've wondered about what goes into the new morning meeting. What is
everybody calls them safety meetings, right? And they've always been called safety meetings, but on a lot of bigger size shows, you don't necessarily have to do it, right? Because the department heads have had 3 to sometimes a year, like 6 months in pre-production. So they're already like talking through, and if there's something that we're doing on any even bigger production, you would do that. Like, there's big safety concerns involved, yes. On on an indie size show, I always try to at least get everybody on one to listen in on walkie is what I'm referring to, or do it more so that we do it on a commercial or something like that, where you see that more often. And that's only because you don't, in past, prior to COVID, that you didn't have the time and in pre-production, so it's better to run through the day with people. And then they're like, okay, you know what I mean? So at least you did that end, and you could get questions, comments, concerns, and also always touch base on safety, right? It's not always done unless there are big safety concerns or something that needs to get run through, right? Because you have a crew of 400, 500. People are all out. You're not going to bring everybody in together to do that. Now it's mandatory. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But on this show, on an indie level, for me, it was just something I would do. So now I started introducing wash your hands. And I literally looked up. The thumbs, by the way, are the least, as you guys would know, 2 thumbs up to you guys, because I know you do your research. But thumbs are the one that gets away, I guess, a lot, is thumbs, is what I'm told, right? So I said, look, guys, make sure you wash your thumbs. Make sure you're, we're using hand sanitizer. This is prior to mask and social distancing. So that show ends, and then I come into full news world. Like, what is going on? Now it's like stuff's getting real, and you're seeing the I think Italy, for me at least, was seeing the what was it, the ice lockers. The ice lockers, to store the bodies and all that stuff, that footage was coming out. That's when I go, wait a minute, guys, something's going on here. Yep, and rightfully so. Like, there's definitely that surrounded by younger people. Not that I'm out of that realm, but there's definitely that indestructibility. Right? That whole, when you're hanging out with 20 years, whatever, is it going to get us? I was in that sort of whatever. And then you start seeing this stuff, and then we got the state of emergency, and then it was lockdown. So then I start seeing all these gigs, because I do annuals. And in the live event world, we call them annuals, because if you did it the one year, it's the same people doing it. Unless you're, made a boo-boo, if everybody's still doing it, and it works out with your schedule, you do that same show. So there's a show I do every year in Washington, D.C. I'll touch base on that one because that's an interesting show. I do the Memorial Day show and the 4th of July show in Washington, D.C., which is from what I know of, and I'm not sure. I know the inauguration might fall under that, and it does. The inauguration does fall under that. But other than that, this is... as far as concert and musical performance, those 2 shows are bills in Congress. So that's on the west lawn of our nation's capital. All right. So it's sort of it's been a great pleasure and honor to work that show.
Hang on, Ryan, back up. You said these are bills in Congress? How does that
Those shows are bills in Congress. So there's a congressional...
Oh, they're required shows.
Yeah,
you're saying they're required shows.
So they were a bill in Congress, so they're voted on, right? So it's why we get... it's sort of like, because they're bill, it's enacted and supported by that. It's not just an entertainment aspect of it. Is they just have to happen, and for them not to happen, there has to be some sort of thing that comes from Congress and some bureaucratic end to these shows. So that's what's interesting about them. And what made it interesting was all these shows start getting canceled, but then we still did a meeting for Memorial Day. And at the time when all the stuff's falling apart, it was so good just to talk, because now the future was denied to us, like the uncertainty of the future, right? And we get into a spiritual, philosophical, and psychological level, but that, in essence, the uncertainty of the future and looking in a dire sense of what you feel, that's what's going to create the greatest deal of fear, correct? So I was going through that, and just to have this meeting, and we go, look, we don't know what's going to happen, but let's, not that we want to forget this, because we should have these issues, but it's we have no idea, right? But let's just have a normal meeting as to, and then we'll touch on that at the end. Otherwise, if we just get into speculation world, we'll just be here the whole day. But honestly, that was one of the most therapeutic things for me at the moment, because everything was changing so quickly in all of our lives. And like I was telling you guys earlier, I just got so used to working that this was a normality for me, just to go through, have that meeting towards the beginning of this stuff and talk about something like it's really going to happen still in a normal world.
That's right. That's right. Things started falling apart like dominoes for most of us right in March. And, what we want to ask you about is, what kind of things did you actually have to do as an AD? Are you really involved in the social distancing? Are you working with the COVID officers and the team? What's going on with that?
My first part back was not actually in an AD position. It was in a production manager position on that show, but not the Memorial Day show. We do the 4th of July show. So that was, I'll tell you a little bit of a story, and it's somewhat relevant, but like, I was terrified, but it was like, you got to do it. You know what I mean? So it was something that came up last minute. It's like Memorial Day got shut down, and then 4th of July, at that point, we were going to do they were going to do a different kind of show, like a very, they had Gary Sinise at his house who sent in a video to do Memorial Day. So we're going to do the same thing, I think, with Stamos and whoever else that ended up being on the show. But then stuff started opening up, and certain shows started coming back. And it was 4th of July, and our executive producer, and rightfully so, said, look, we want to do something for America. All right, it's 4th of July. We need to do a show because most people are going to be at their homes. So we want to do something that's really going to be about us coming together. So we ended up doing a show that we weren't necessarily going to do it on that level, and then we had to work together to figure it out.
Well, I think you had some executive prodding on that one as well.
Right.
You had all kinds of pressure, to cut. You had a president who was not going to do this event virtually.
And what's interesting about this show, the president doesn't have anything to do with it. It's a nonpartisan show. And specifically, I won't get into more details on that, but that's why it's a bill, or in an action in Congress, because they don't want it to be partisan. So they never have the president out for that reason, or any politicians, because of it being for the troops or for, the country. But we did it, and I was driving out, and we had to figure it out. The white papers weren't out yet.
Wow.
No, they were not out yet. So this was prior to that. On a side note, the first sanctioned show by SAG and IATSE, there's a famous phone call known as the 12 Productions that SAG, IATSE, DGA, and Teamsters all had a big conference call with everybody. They were one of the 12. In fact, they ended up becoming, and this Variety actually confirmed this, was the first sanctioned show by the unions to go post-COVID. And the guy who produced and directed that was the producer of the show I did out here in Michigan. So
yeah.
He did that in Oklahoma, because Oklahoma was the first one that sort of opened up to start being able to do that. And he ended up being the first show. They did testing, but this was before there was a testing protocol, right?
Yeah.
Still tested. And in fact, that show helped. They watched that show and sort of help, be a testing lab rat to what would eventually become this. And then we're all having conversations, when I was stuck in the house, I'm calling ADs, how are we going to get back to work? And then I remember hearing about, Steven Soderbergh, and then this article came out with Soderbergh putting together, being the director of Contagion, which to me, at first I was like, it's pretty Hollywood. But then you realize, look, to make that movie, you had to deal with a lot of research. You had to connect the dots there and do your research, And as anybody knows, Barton, you would definitely attest to this. You learn a lot by dealing with a subject. in making a film. You got to have your research. You want it to be true to life. So he made I think one of the pinnacle disease movies, yeah.
Yes, he did.
And
It's so painful. I think Soderbergh is different from. He's a lot more of an intellectual than your typical mainstream, Hollywood kind of director, auteur.
He's a game changer. He's like, to me, what I hope the industry's going to is more human beings like him, because he's a good human being.
What is it like on a feature now? Like, because we're going beyond. I mean, you were working at a time where these protocols were just getting introduced. Now,
we didn't come up with the protocols for the first show I did.
Yeah,
there are certain guidelines that were out there in place, but we taped out. We got there days in advance. We got PPE. We taped out squares around stuff, and then while we were doing the show, the white papers dropped, and that was the game change. Like, we're already in the cups of it. We had exemptions for some of the requirements because they had not been fully out. So it was, but we're going there. It was very in this virtual world of Zooming. There's so many Zoom meetings because so many people are working remotely.
That's for sure. Yes, everyone was. Yeah.
What's it like on a feature these days? I mean, like, because we're getting beyond, masks and distance into whole new ways of working, really. I mean, you have to plan this thing differently. You have to coordinate. You have to put the way that you're scheduling has to change. I mean, you've got a different pre-production and you've got a very different shooting day now, it seems to me, than ever before. What is it like working under these new circumstances?
So, I think, okay, so part of the aspect of when we were having these discussions on the Soderbergh thing is hearing stuff through very accurate sources that were part of these conversations that are happening. Because, while I'm stuck in my house, I was also doing this thing where I was just calling and talking to people. And then I was part of some groups with some industry professionals that were we're having our big group open discussions about stuff, and some conversations were happening, and I was hearing some things. And one of the things I was hearing is, part of this committee, and again, this might be all hearsay, but I trust sources, is that they didn't know where this entity would come from, as now that we call the health safety manager and health safety supervisor, right? In the past, the AD's number one job, and maybe I should have said this when you asked me earlier, Barton, about the AD position, but really the number one job, and I know I say schedule and all this stuff, is safety. Your number one job is safety, and I think, and I'm finding out that some Michigan friends don't know about this, but Mark definitely does, and I don't know, Barton, the Sarah Jones, are you familiar?
Safety for Sarah. Yep.
It's for Sarah. So my roommate in Georgia knew her. These guys go to the Sarah Day, and I've worked so much in Georgia, and it's a big thing. And last shot of the day is martini, right? In Georgia, it's something they've really tried to take off and hear it all the time. First shot of the day, Jonesy. But to really hear the intricacies of that story, man, it's insane, right?
Yeah, that was.
So this is a
combination of errors.
She's the crew member who was killed on a set, and it rocked. It really stunned people.
100%. And you know who got the stiffest sentence?
Producer?
It's first AD. And
no.
First AD, even though the producers and directors, but she got one of the stiffest sentences. You can look it up. She got one of the stiffest ones for not necessarily being part of that. We could get into that. Yeah. But she got a very stiff sentence. And if you look at it, even from a DGA standpoint, now, and they've just changed it, the legalities, it used to be that a second AD would not be criminally liable for a set incident. It would be the first AD, right? Unless the second AD was running set, you can make a case. But the second AD would be the first person called to testify. They'd be one of the first people. You know what I mean? Even though they might not have been set in that moment, they would definitely be asked to testify as to what happened in terms of safety. It is on the first AD, unless there's a stunt coordinator there or somebody else. And if you notice, on being part of any stunts, the first AD will tend, it depends on the stunt, but a lot of times you'll see the stunt coordinator just even call it. All right, guys, roll it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yes.
And that sort of helps from a liability standpoint.
Well, you're absolutely right, Ryan. I mean, the AD is the first line of defense. The AD is the captain of the ship, even beyond the producer, who also saw some stiff penalties, and the location manager as well.
The location manager did not, because we could get it, I think it's a whole other subject, but he sent an email. Did you see that? So he was the one guy, they tried to actually patsy him out, and he goes, hold up, I didn't show up to work that day, and here's the emails, me saying that you should not do this. So
that's right. I remember that now. Yeah.
I know that this is a whole other episode that I feel like we could do, is sort of talk about that case and its implications.
Well, just bringing that up is a very important thing, because that, for many of us around the world, was kind of a wake-up call. We're standing in the back of trucks with no support. We're walking in dangerous places, working in dangerous places. That was the start of it.
And honestly, people are going to jail now. That was the gate. Like, people are going to go to jail. And now, like, I work on indie movies, right? Where sometimes, there's certain stuff that, like, look, play ball when you need to. Your job is, I had a good friend, and I'm sure we all know him, Ely, is always like, I've learned a lot from Ely Barta, by the way, if anybody in this town.
Yeah, he's
because our job's not to say, no, directors hate hearing that. No, we're not doing this. This isn't preferable for safety concerns. What about this? To find the safer alternative to do something safe, but always be safe. The job of an AD is not necessarily no, right? It's what's the alternative. And it's only no when it has to be, right? As a first AD on a DGA show, I believe, I could shut down a show, right? And it would have to go through with more of a union backing, and the production would at least stop for a day, right? If the AD's like, we're not doing it, it's not happening. You'd have to fire that AD, bring in somebody, there'd be a whole shutdown moment, but on an indie, you don't always have that. I could shut it down, but then they go, if you're fired, who's going to do this, right?
Well, this is very true, because, so we're talking about an indie, which is typically a non-union show, and a union show, which has to follow the guidelines. And even the crew members on these shows, I mean, for me as an IATSE member, I have to take training trust certificate courses to prove that I understand about not only COVID, but safety in general, in order to work on an IATSE show. But then you've got people that are non-union who aren't following these guidelines at all.
Mm-hmm. And then there's OSHA guidelines that override even the industry guidelines, because OSHA is for any place of employment, right? So there's just so much, and safety is a huge thing for any first AD that doesn't realize that their job, or somebody who calls himself an AD, I'm not trying to be that guy or high on a horse, but if your number one concern is not safety, then you're not, you haven't done your due diligence in that position, right?
That's it. Let me ask you this. So you're on a set now, a union set. What I've heard is, and please, confirm some of these things. There's bubbles, first of all, that are dealt with, and there are certain protocols for each of those bubbles.
So,
but tell me.
I want to go back, and I'm trying to pull the conversation this way, because I want to make a point that's relevant, right?
Okay, sure.
The speculation that was coming in was, is this going to be the AD's job now? Right? Because it's safety's then their concern, or is it the medic? Is it the IATSE medic? Right? Where would it have gone? Right? So all these conversations are happening. Would it be locations? Would it become a Teamster entity? Right? If it were to go union, all these things are happening. And what they decided that what a HSM and a HSS is, right? And I want to not assume that everybody knows what these titles are. Health Safety Manager, right? And these came out per the white papers. And a Health Safety Supervisor. These are required for anything that is a film, I want to say narrative film, right? Because these are also apply to live event, but I've seen live event not necessarily have these titles, but have compliance officers that you're seeing similar to commercials, right? Or reality TV has
and on union commercials too. Union commercials too have to have those.
And it's a title, schmitle, or whatever people are saying. That's you have a lot of these things. I'm seeing it's health safety, COVID compliance officer, and you have a whole team of these guys. And I've worked commercials that have done that in union commercials and blah, blah, blah. And it was not those particular titles, but somebody that functioned within that realm. But the reason why you wouldn't necessarily have them in commercials and they become compliance officers, because the AICP, right, which is the ruling body of producers in commercials, has pushed back considerably against the unions for mandatory testing. Now, are some commercials and production companies in their best interest now testing people? 100%. But it's not required. Commercials follow their own, even though they're even union commercials, fall under their own ruling body and do not have to adhere to the white papers. So we could get into what's happening over there and the reason why they call them compliance officers versus health safety managers or health safety supervisors. But what a health safety manager and health safety supervisor really do is they are the ones responsible for testing and ensuring the bubble, right? They're the science behind that. And yes, they are there to help facilitate and make sure distancing is happening. That's one of their add-ons. But if anybody that I've really talked to about this on the upper echelon of productions going, the bigger thing is testing. Testing is the number one thing that you can do based on all the research that's coming out to ensure that you don't have a big pandemic spread on your production. Testing.
And going back for a moment, so a health and safety manager versus a compliance officer, the very word compliance says to me that, well, the production's compliant, it's safe enough. Whereas the HSM is more like really ensuring the safety of it's a difference in mindset. This is ensuring the safety of everybody working here, and testing is the cornerstone of that's what the way it begins with. It's everything. So why would it? It was the sticking point for me that bothered me for the longest time. Was like, no, you're going to put all these. You're not going to test, and it's going to be. It felt so much softer on safety to me, and it didn't feel safe.
Look, that being said, what I will say is my dad has worked for Chrysler for years, and he's gone to work every day. You know what I mean? They wear masks. They get their temperature checked at the start of the day. And then, this is how most of America is operating. They're not, I can't think of. I'm
not testing before I go get my hair cut.
Does that make sense? You get what I'm saying? Look, to get this stupid setup, not stupid, it's amazing. And it was like, look, I actually was sort of like, I don't care about Zooms because I got over Zoomed. I was like, can we just is that a deer in your backyard? Is that your dog?
It's a dog. It's a dog.
But yeah, to go to Micro Center, there was a line around the store. And I'm like, this in the store, there's a line inside the store. It's packed. And I was like, but I need this. You know what I mean? I'm like, I gotta have a good podcast with my friends Mark, and Barton.
It's a service that you provide. Yeah.
But here's the thing, like, are those guys testing there? You get what I'm saying? But when it comes to the film industry, the reason testing is it's a different thing. Because some of the research that came out from the protests is masks really do work so far. Now there's new strains that we're going to find out, but they haven't, as far as I know, and from testing and from the trace research that was told to me, again, fact check me. I would love to, if I'm ever wrong. But as from based on the conversations I've had, they found from the protest that ultimately masks are very effective. Masks are super effective, but the difference between film, right? Unless all our movies from now on are going to become post-apocalyptic mask movies,
Masks,
or
right.
we just put, or we'll just everybody wears their mask and we put their face on in post. The difference with our industry is that you have to take off your mask.
Yeah, no, me, the actor, I have to take
As an
it off.
actor.
Like my safety awareness and my stress level over it is extraordinary, and for that reason, there are it's either safe or it's not. It's safe enough. If it's got to be safe enough for me to go on and not only have my mask off, but be face to face and have a conversation, have contact,
Yes, somebody. Like these are all things that are happening.
Yeah. How do you handle, you're a nice guy and you have a really positive attitude, and I think that you have kept that as, I think that you not only do that naturally, but you probably sort of, you say, do you have a mantra like keep it positive? Because the stress here has enhanced beyond the stress of your job to begin with the hours and the pressure, but suddenly now you have something. Now you have a pandemic. What does it do to your stress level, and how do you manage it?
Insane. It's insane. And I did a show where I was, a guy running background. And that's your most vulnerable people. Like as much as we talk about the bubbles and sort of from what I know on how they're working. But essentially, it's... background, it's not going to be cost effective to put them all up in a hotel, right? They're in a testing bubble. It's a fact. Like you could still put them in your testing bubble, but then it's, who's driving them to work? Technically, a full testing bubble is, I'm working, but I'm going to come home and my dad is going to work somewhere who's not testing and this and that. But even with those circumstances, what it's saying is that, like, look, if you're in a bubble, that means you're in a testing cycle. Now, you should do your best to limit risk. And that's what all this stuff is, not to eliminate COVID being there or even having. It's mitigating risk to the best of our ability, right? Because to say a full-on bubble would be something closer to what the NBA did, right? The NBA, which was pretty effective, but I don't know. And I heard... And I don't want to talk about that because I've worked for Tyler Perry, but I heard some stories coming out of that. They did a bubble there at Tyler Perry where people stayed. They went through, took some of the old warehouse studio spaces and put up drywall and made these rooms, and people were living there and staying there. And look,
not with their families though during that time. They're not going home to their spouse.
They're not. For that one, they were Mark, you know what a Vacus is, right? Like for a live show. So Vacus is...
You have to say that. Yeah, do tell us, please.
A Vacus is for any show that has a high security detail, right? And you'll see it on the halftime show, all the Olympics, all the pageants I've worked on. And what happens is they do a bomb sweep, right? So once everything's been swept, it becomes a containment zone.
That's right.
Right? So now anything coming in has to be swept, right? You have to go through a Vacus process, right? Like scanned, radared, all this stuff, right? And it's on multiple shows. When you're at the Capitol, we do it. But once the sweeping happens, I mean, it's a clean area, right? So what they did at Tyler Perry was once everybody was in and they fully disinfected and they tested and made sure everybody was good, nobody in, nobody out, and the stuff that was coming in had to go through a disinfecting and process. So, like, let's say you had a runner that was communicating with the designer who was inside there, or maybe the designer's working remotely from Zoom, and there's the key set costumers receiving the stuff that's coming, right? So they would put stuff. So if you needed stuff, you had to sit for 3 days and be disinfected on top of it. So they had a whole like area. Boom, you're bringing something in from the outside. It's getting cleaned. So like, imagine like for the Vacus process that works for a bomb. Now we're sweeping. Okay, nothing. So anything coming in is checked, right?
How do you schedule for that?
Well, that's what Tyler Perry did. That's one of the first ones to sort of go and approach it from that aspect. I personally, and honestly, it could be great though. But you'd have to write the kind of script, and it all have to be at stage. I think if you're doing a show, it's all at a studio and a stage. And some of the stuff that I've seen that's been done at sound stages, or some of my friends have been working in those shows, those have been some of the most safe, right? We all know there's nothing better than a stage day walk away, right? House lights up. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. See you later. But so, for example, they were able to have more of that prep, right? And then they had boxes around all the cameras. But when you're moving in the world, like some of the shows I had, you're back in a normal world. You can't. That doesn't function as that way. Do you know what I mean? So some of the stuff that should be done, and I don't know what time we're tapping into here, but is when you have a sound stage, you could do stuff that way, and they were able to store and keep just everybody staying there, right? So you can't do that with a commercial. Is that right? You know what I mean? Unless you're only going to film at a stage. And maybe that's what we do. Depending how crazy this gets. Like, what if it became this way of now studios include housing, right? And then what I was sort of hoping for is the speculation that this is going to be summer camp, right? Everybody gets tested. We're staying in a testing bubble, but we're all getting to hang out, sit by the fire at night.
But is it? I mean, like, you've been on some bubbled situations. Is there something different about that working experience versus? I mean, things are a year ago. Things were very, very different.
Yeah, there's been some great experiences through that. I was at a hotel at a show, and a lot of times actors, especially A-listers, like, you'll see them at the wrap party, and occasionally you'll see them at the hotel bar, but they do their own thing. But when you're in a bubble and nobody else, you can't go anywhere else, everybody's hanging out with everybody because they're the only ones safe to hang out with. So you end up having some unique experiences with some phenomenal people, right? That's been one cool thing about it.
I spoke with
yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I spoke with PA on a show that you worked on, Edmund.
Yeah.
And he had a phenomenal experience talking with Soderbergh.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's just because of the nature of this show, but Soderbergh, from what I've heard and from my interactions with him, he's a different human being. He's different. I got to have some great conversations, with him too, and that's just he's very approachable. Or it might have been the nature, but I've heard that this is just sort of how his way of doing things is. And honestly, Mark, and I'm sure you heard from the other crew friends, his way of doing things is great. Because if I'm not doing 16-hour days, I'm a happy man.
Oh, sure. My friends that worked with Clint Eastwood, he works 8 hours a day, and then he's golfing. So, they like that. Other directors are like that as well.
So it's a shorter day. Do you also imagine that some of these changes that are coming in, maybe as a result of what?
That's just a Soderbergh show in general. There's other shows that have been doing nightmare days. And like, what's crazy is that my other friend was doing one of the big Marvel shows. So we were talking back and forth, doing what I was doing on another show. You know what I mean? And everybody was doing stuff different. I think the hardest thing's transportation. This is what I found out. Transportation's hard, right? Because you got to have crew parking. You can't have everybody come park at set. It would not work that way, especially when you start getting into deeper amounts of crew. So we were allowed in a 15 pass van that would normally take 14 people, or 15, right? Is it the 15 out?
Yeah,
the driver
15
not
pass van. Yeah, that's
well,
right.
it's 15 passengers, or is it driver? Whatever, who cares, right? You'd normally be able to take a lot more people. We were allowed 2 people per 15 pass van.
That's a lot of roundies.
It'll take forever to transport people.
But there were other shows that were doing 4. They were doing the same amount of testing. That's like, these aren't like mandatory things in the white papers that how many people could go per pass van. This is their HSM going, this is what we feel is going to, make the most, because the balance, a HSM is hard. Because it's not just balancing like, just the COVID needs of this thing. It's looking at like, okay, this would make more sense for us from a COVID standpoint, but this is logistically dumb and just not doable, right? Or not functioning. So we have to pick a little bit more of a riskier, but how can we mitigate this, right? And also, how can we be cost effective? That's a big element of this, right? So it's like, fine, are we going to do this? Do we reuse? There's one point on a show, and I don't want to mention particular shows, but the HMM on some shows, especially commercials, which are already making money, right? Commercials already make money because they have a client.
Yeah.
I guess, the makeup artists were changing their gowns and shields per person, right? What we determined on one show goes, look, the doctor, we talked, this is highly financially and economically irresponsible, and that's what we're finding is that the risk of spread from this doesn't outweigh, it would just eat up too much of the budget here. So yeah, in a perfect world, would we love to do that? Yeah, but the risk standpoint isn't, and then there's some stuff, and I think the danger of it is this, right? Nothing could be perfect, right? You're like, oh man, why can't I just ride in the van with this guy, right? When I was just like in a room with him, you know what I mean? We were all just in a tight room because we had to be, because that was the shot in the scene. So now we can only have 2 people in this van. Like, there's certain stuff you start going, this is whatever. But then the over cynicism is the biggest danger. And I know we're running out of time, but what I found,
right? I mean, that's where people get complacent and start rejecting.
100%. Yeah. It's like a diet, right? You're like, oh, hey, I ate this one Twinkie. Whatever, let me have 5 more now. Right? Like, this is, I'm already not doing this, already happened. That's
COVID. The Twinkie is made of virus.
Yeah. Right? But you get what I'm saying, though? That it's a similar, maybe it's a bad analogy, but what I mean is that sometimes you see one thing and you see a complacency that's going to be there, guys. Nobody's going to do a perfect set. If we want to go on to anything and be negative Nancy's or be somebody that's overcritical, we can. You could do it on any show I've been on. I've heard it on any show. Are there criticisms? Yes, but it's that people are doing their very best, and it's important that we figure this out. And I want to say that.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
You think some of these things are here to stay? Some of these changes.
And who knows how long this thing's going to happen, right? And one of the, remember you said the producers' money, and I don't know if. Look, what I'm seeing is some of the people's ideas of making stuff safer is less people. And that's far from what, it's like, hey, less G&E, so like, you know what, this could be safer. And by making it safer, now you have to work 4 times harder up these stairs so we could be safer. That's not right, and we know that there could be other incentives, and this creates a very slippery slope from a budgetary standpoint from some people, okay? I don't want to put that out, but it's important that we stay working, Barton, because there's some technologies that are coming out. of art. Like, just, you don't have to go any further than look at what's happening with VR right now, right? And some words are escaping me, but they are, and I've seen the specs for this, and it's already out there. Like, there's a potential where we might never need set deck ever. Like, the virtual sets that are being created are unbelievable.
Yeah, they can map. They can map a location. They can map a room. They can map a person. You don't need actors.
And now with the graphic, like, they could technically, I promise you, Barton, we laugh at that, but look at facial recognition software right now. Look at how you could just go on Facebook and I could put your face on anybody. And now animation's coming. We all need to stay working and maintain this craft, because I promise you that we're in danger of one crew-size permit. Because now, here's what happens. Yours, as you know, Mark, in our industry, it's like, oh, we did it with this before. Let's just keep doing it with this. And you're like, yeah, you did it with this, but some people were getting murdered. Like, some people, you know what I mean, were like having the worst days of their life, but they were super great workers and cared a lot, so they made it happen. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. But in the time allotted, so, tie it all up, Ryan. What is, what's going to happen going forward?
What's going to happen is that we need to keep going at this. We need to make mistakes, because that's life. Nothing's going to be perfect. We need to support people, right? Rather than being a marching squad with pitchforks and fire to look at Dr. Frankenstein's creation, we need to work to be better doctors, right? We need to come from a place of, how do I stay calm? I meditate a lot, right? That's honest to God truth that's changed my life. I've heard it from people countless above me. Meditation. But on set, I'm not even privy to that calmness. But what we need to do is find a place, and not to get too into the hoopla to some, but understand a collective whole that we're in this together, and we should keep going at it. We should take the risk, but we need to do it as safe as possible, because we got to find a way to keep doing this thing and do it safe. And for me, it's not a choice. I promise you. I didn't get, if you could choose a different industry, I tell everybody coming up, do that. You make more money as a waiter starting out, I promise you, and a lot less stress. And, I remember I did an 8-hour day on set. I'm like, damn, what am I going to do with the rest of my time? We're in 12 hours. So, look, this is a I have to do, not a I want to do. And for so many of us film friends, I promise you, there's a different industry. Do it. We're all in this because we have to do it. So I say we keep doing it. We support each other. And we find ways to do this as safe as possible. And, I think testing is the biggest way. Not all these productions are going to have the means to test as much as possible. We find ways, like, maybe we make a camp movie, right? A movie at a campsite. We disinfect the heck out of it. Test everybody on the end. Test them, maybe it's not a 3-time cycle then, if we could contain people. We find ways to do this stuff on a budget. We got to think outside the box and look for the new ways, because we have to stay working, right?
Very inspiring, man. I'm glad to know that your messages keep going, that your messages keep seeking it, because for so many of us, it was like, well, maybe this is, maybe everything is changing. We're going to have to find something else to do. But it's great for me to hear from you, and that you're sensing this among the industry, that there's a strong desire to keep going and to keep doing this dangerous thing, but do it safely. And that's remarkable, man. I appreciate it.
And if you just look at history, anytime you get rid of the art, you get rid of the heart of a culture. So we got to keep the heart.
You got that right, man. Well, this has been extraordinary talking to you, and I hope you'll come back and keep us updated on everything you're doing, because this is you're right in the center of it, man. So I salute you, and I'm really appreciating that you're out there fighting the good fight here, right on the cutting edge too. That's really cool.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
And I mean, Michigan, man. I mean, this is you're a success story. So we're very proud that you keep coming back. So we appreciate you.
It's good to be home again.
So for the Michigan Production Alliance Safety Dispatch #1 for 2021, I'm Mark Adler.
I'm Barton Bund.
Take care.
Next time.
Be safe. Recording is stopped.